All right. Hello, everyone. So welcome to our virtual event space. My name is Allie. You might recognize me from our Lake Forest Park location. And I'm your host for this evening. I am so excited to be introducing Samit Basu and Saad Z Hossain here to discuss Samit's newest novel, The City Inside. But before we get into the good stuff, on behalf of all of us here at Third Place Books, I just want to quickly thank you all so much for tuning in. For those of you who may not know, we are an independent bookstore with 3 locations in the Seattle area. We are having more and more of our events in person, which is so exciting, but our online event program is sticking around to connect readers and authors in a virtual space from all over the world. So thank you all so much for tuning in and buying books. Your support is what makes all of this possible. So if you haven't gotten your hands on any of the books that come up this evening and you would like to, I will be linking books in the chat. For those of you in the Seattle area, come on in, grab a copy off the shelf, or you can place an order online and come pick them up in store. Or if you're not local or not leaving the house, we of course do ship. So go ahead and follow those links to chat or in chat to our website. While you're over on our website, I definitely encourage you to check out some of our other upcoming events. We have a super exciting roster coming up this spring, as you may have just seen in the slideshow. So if you'd like to stay in touch with our community, you can sign up for our newsletter. It's a weekly update about events, exciting releases, our online book clubs, and of course, follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books for the quickest updates and recommendations. So tonight we are here for about an hour, and towards the end we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which we very much hope that you do, go ahead and leave those in the Q&A box, which should be either at the top or bottom of your screen. It is different than the chat box, which is great for virtual applause and connecting with each other. I absolutely invite you to share where you're tuning in from in chat. But when it comes time for questions, do make sure those end up in the Q&A so we can most easily find them. While you're in our chat and question spaces, I want to remind you to please lead with kindness and refrain from any inappropriate behavior or harassment. And finally, should there be any technical issues, we will work as quickly as we can to resolve them. And we appreciate so much your patience and understanding. All right, so it is time now for us all to settle in, because without further ado, I am so pleased to welcome Samit Basu, the internationally critically acclaimed and best-selling author of the Game World trilogy, Turbulence and Resistance, and of course the book of the evening, The City Inside, which was shortlisted for the JCB Prize, India's biggest literary award. He also works as a director and screenwriter, a comics writer, and a columnist. In conversation this evening, I'm so pleased to introduce Saad Z Hossain, who writes fantasy, sci-fi, and Black comedy. His novels include Kundo Wakes Up, Cyber Mage, Escape from Baghdad, and Jinn City. His short stories have appeared in anthologies A Jinn Falls in Love, The Best Sci-Fi and Fantasy of the Year, Volume 12, and Apex Books, World of Sci-Fi, Volume 4. So the book this evening is The City Inside, which K.J. Charles called an extraordinary immersive read about a horribly plausible near future of grotesque wealth disparity, climate change, abusive yet useless government, invasive technology, and people carefully ignoring it all by plugging themselves into electronic entertainment, which sounds chillingly familiar to me. So thank you all so much for being here. Audience members, don't be shy in chat if you need anything. And with that, I'm going to pass the stage to our authors. So welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. Hi.
Thank you so much for having us over, Ali, and Third Place Books. Yeah. Hi, Saad.
Hi, Sam.
It's really strange that we kind of live geographically not very far away from each other, and yet after all these years we're meeting 12-hour time zones away on a Zoom, but also kind of in Seattle.
Yeah, so it's 7 in the morning here, so It's the first time I've been up this early in 10, 15 years, I think. Of
What does it feel like, and what was the last time? Sorry, I mean, I know we're supposed to be talking about this, but I'm just fascinated by what could have impelled you 15 years earlier to experience 7 a.m.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels quite nice, actually. It's very pleasant in the morning. I wish I'd gotten up earlier before.
Well, no.
Okay, let's get back to the book. I was just thinking, first of all, that I like the names of your characters, right? Joey and Rudra in Indi. Do you, when you're writing these characters, like, do you start with the name, or do you start with a?
Yeah, in the sense it varies from book to book. For this one, it was kind of narrowing down onto individual characters from types or what they would represent, or kind of social classes, etc., that they would represent. So I think when and I'm sure that you do the same thing, in the sense that when you're looking at characters, you also give them a name that's kind of accurate to who they are, but you're also looking at things like keep it relatively user friendly, give them something that to people who speak the language that their name is from, it probably means something more or has connotations beyond the actual text as it reads to someone who's not familiar. Is it similar for you? How do you do it?
I just want it to look nice on paper, right? Because I don't so much read aloud, right? So if it looks good by visually, I mean, I kind of go with names like that. So sometimes you end up with weird names that don't mean anything, But
yeah,
I mean, that's the first thing, right? Because if you don't like the main character's name or how it looks, it's kind of hard to get into it.
Absolutely.
When you're
well, I'm glad that the names passed the Hossain test.
No, it's I can't get started often unless the name is right, So I was just thinking that when I started reading your book, that actually the names were, they all look pretty good, and I think they worked in both languages. In our language. I mean, you speak Bangla as well, or what's your main? Yeah, right. So it's kind of hard to straddle that, right? I was thinking maybe you could give us a synopsis of of the book, and then maybe after we start talking about it, it would make more sense to people maybe who haven't read it.
Yeah, sure. So The City Inside is a near future science fiction book set in Delhi. It's about two young people, people in their 20s, who are struggling to find a way to cope with the environment they're in, which is full of exciting things that we're all familiar with now: surveillance capitalism, climate change, this sense of constantly being watched, and also having to conform endlessly to ever-changing rules that are defined by a large number of governments, corporations, entities that you don't even know about. So it's set in Delhi, in sort of nebulously a decade or so in the future. And Delhi at this time, like Delhi today, is short of water, short of power, high on pollution, high on dust, incredibly hot, deeply conformist, very complicated, smogged like anything. And it's a situation where there's the walls are listening to you, trust is impossible, no one knows what's going on. So pretty much the present day with a little bit of exaggeration. And so the challenge for these two people is to find ways to, one, cope with the environment that they're in, and a series of events occurs which makes it more and more difficult for them to look away from the darker aspects of the world around them, because they're both people who are privileged enough to have sort of success and happiness and peace and security if they conform to the adequate extent. And so this is kind of the story of how they fail at conforming to the adequate extent. There are people who can't change the world, but there are people who learn over the course of the book to change themselves, to find community, to cope, and then outwit the world around them.
It's quite. Uh, you're talking about you know, the kind of problems that the book has right now. I mean, Delhi has right now, and one of the things that sci-fi can do is essentially deal with problems, right? You can use sci-fi to fix problems that you see in the real world. And that's kind of what struck me a little bit, is that we have a chance to tackle serious issues that we see through fiction more than almost any other genre, because we have the cover of, oh, it's science fiction, you know, don't take it that seriously, right? But we can tackle serious things. So how would you fix some of these issues that you're talking about here? For example, let's start with there's a kind of, you know, it's about flow stars, right? So it's about kind of internet stars that are just celebrities for no reason, and you know, we see that a lot, right? No accomplishments, just kind of relatability, something like that. How do you? I mean, for me, that seems, in a way, wrong, in the sense that, you know, you should celebrate human accomplishment rather than just kind of this kind of empty celebrity. How would you fix that? What's an alternative you can give people so they stop following these people?
You know, we sound right now like we have many heads and many tentacles, and we are sitting in a spaceship just above Seattle discussing how do we fix this? So you know, I think, yeah, I completely agree with you know, with everything you said when you started saying this about the potential in science fiction to bring about really large changes to society, and you know, and fix these gigantic problems. So when I was researching this book, it was pretty much all out of, you know, a never-ending set of nonfiction, speculative nonfiction, the news from various realities and different propaganda systems, real and fake. So I think I love both the immersion and the escape that science fiction can give you, right? One of my very, very favorite things about your books, for example, is that you have these wild, imaginative things transposed onto, you know, real world locations that, even if they're far future, are immediately visually familiar to me, and I know exactly where everything is. So it's that combination of the familiar and the strange is what makes it more exciting to me. But when I was building this book, you know, there is that slightly dictatorial urge to clean things out and reframe chaotic societies into frameworks that make sense. You know, where institutions work, where logical rules are followed. But I think it's safe to say that both of us at least live in worlds where these rules do not apply, where we are constrained in fiction by logic and structure, and needing clarity, and, you know, trying to give the reader clarity as we have clarity ourselves, no matter how chaotic the actual work is. But real life just doesn't work like that. So when I was building this book, it was pretty clear to me from the beginning that I would not present a world where the characters could have a single way to fix things. They're not world savers. They cannot bring about a change in the big systems watching them, partly because the world is also designed to not have them know how. They don't have access to the people who are making decisions. They don't have agency to change it through things like voting, or, you know, writing strong letters to the editor, or whatever it is. So really it becomes a question of coping with the reality that you're in, and, you know, trying to find purpose, trying to find clarity, trying to find ways to engage that are meaningful to both you and to the people around you, and, you know, just surviving and thriving. And because the book also grew out of my own fears about the world we are living in now. So, but to come back to the interesting thing, which is what you were talking about, which is influencer culture, how would I fix influencer culture?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think anyone wants to know influencer culture. I have been, and I've been sort of, you sound fairly tired of influencer culture, but you have also built a life for yourself where you don't have to engage with the worst of it. But I have been working for a decade in Bollywood, Saad. I have seen some things. So,
Okay.
so I think how would I fix influencer culture? I would just stop it. I would just authoritarianly stop it. But we are
There
also
you
going
go.
to, like the uncles that we are.
Yeah, see, everybody becomes a conservative at the end of their
Yes.
lives, right? You
So,
know,
so I'm going to say, oh, we should stop this influencer culture, I should say,
ban
while
them.
desperately trying to boost my Instagram followership. So yeah, I think we should just move on to the next.
Okay. There's more things to the book is full of disturbing things, right? And one of the things that kind of casually in there are the ways you got minorities, let's say Muslims or Dalits or what have you, just kind of obviously pushed down, right? But in a systematic way, just kind of excluded from everything, and not even in an overt like police beating you on the head way, but more like there's just no access. And I suppose you think is that already there, right? And how would you fix that?
You know, this one is something that clearly, in the present day scenario, a lot of thought has gone into from people much more expert in this than I am. So when it comes to present day India, the multitude of ways in which minorities of not just minorities, because minorities also implies low in number, right? Which um, often it's privileged minorities imposing tremendous oppression on the vast majority of the population. Because we have reached a situation where a lot of the fundamental institutions and the fundamental processes through which the citizens are supposed to fight back against, any kind of oppressive behavior are either not working or corrupted beyond belief, or in a situation where there's the sort of artistry of a delayed process, which people are made to, a torture that people are put through because they don't have the resources to keep fighting endless battles while they wait for years for courts to look at their minor dispute, and police aren't helping anyone and so on. So we're seeing this very frightening situation where there's this range of, and the most visceral example of this is the way that Muslims are being treated in India right now and have been for the last decade. And it's not like the entire history of democratic India has been free of strife, conflict, oppression for Muslims and every other kind of less powerful community. But the way that it's accelerated and the way that it's become overt over the last decade has been absolutely frightening. And you're right, it's not that kind of, it's not that kind of in your face violence, which it sometimes is, but mostly it is a slow and enabled restriction from access, restriction from work, restriction from housing and things like that. So and what is most frightening to me is that there seems to be no way to address it because no one knows how, so you end up being complicit with silence or complicit with apathy or just not knowing what to do because you're in a complete information fog and no system that you can deal with any of this seems to work. So yeah, so this was a large part of this fog of fog of lack of knowledge on the one hand and lack of any idea of how things can be fixed was another. It's the fog of, because even though the protagonists of this book are particularly privileged and they're fine, they just don't know what to do, and it's trying to overcome that with where the struggle lies.
Okay, but how would you fix it as a kind of omnipotent author? Because you're writing dystopia or utopian tropes, and it's not a realistic answer I want, because I mean, of course, there's professors of economy or politics whose job it is to think about realistic solutions, right? But science fiction authors give us, or any author gives us, kind of dreams and hopes and aspirations, let's say.
Right. So the solutions that I would think of wouldn't be science fictional so much as perhaps they would require science fictional means, but the end goal would be essentially cleaning up the electoral process on the one hand, and a brutally enforced shutdown of hate propaganda on the other. Because if you've got, I think, as we've seen during good parts or relatively good parts of our democratic history, when the air isn't filled with poison, and when electoral processes are clean, no matter which party is running in power, I don't think that the citizenry as a mass, when not completely, mind programmed by hate from 15 directions, wants to do anything other than have a peaceful life. So the question would then be, what science fictional method would I use to bring about, this restoration of values very speedily? And you could do anything from, mind control viruses to really large and tough looking robots, encouraging people with word and gesture to obey, but nicely.
That sounds dystopian, dude. I'm not sure I want large robots telling me to obey.
Yeah. No one wants large encouraging robots. This is true.
Have you seen those robots? The ones that look like dogs that jump up and down.
I have.
They're using them for border patrol in America, right?
I quickly put them into the new book. Sorry?
They're using them for border patrol, I think, in America somewhere.
That's so nice.
Damn it.
Just want them far away from me. And the thing is that in our part of the world, I don't know. I don't know how good the roads are where you live, but those robots could get nowhere near my house. They would just be lying in a pothole, vibrating gently, and making metallic barks in their own way.
Giant potholes are the solution.
Yes, while people, yeah. Giant potholes are usually the solution, or at least hopefully so, because they're there. Now we can use them for good.
What strikes me is that from our part of the world, I think we have a natural suspicion of authority, right? In the sense
reason,
that,
I'd say.
Yeah, with reason, with the sense that, like, you don't really expect good governance. You expect bad governance, but to a tolerable level, right? And if it becomes intolerable, then it's actually your job to go and burn shit until something happens, right? And that, I don't know if that comes through in your book. You have the years that not to be mentioned, or you have a kind of citizenry in your book that seems always on the brink of coming out and fighting, right? And you think that's really the only solution to anything, is that the vast majority of humans actually have to be ready to burn everything down, if things become intolerable? Because they do it in France, right? A little bit, right? They don't like the price of fuel, they come and start burning shit in Paris, and they seem to have better kind of control over their government, which is less authoritarian than some of the alarming kind of Western countries that are becoming more authoritarian.
Yeah, I mean, I I don't think any of this is desirable, so to speak, but it really boils down to what people's options are in a given situation, given the degree of bad governance that they're facing, right? So I think in the more authoritarian countries, what might be the case is that the, the machinery for keeping people distracted and subservient and too concerned with just the basic survival aspect of life to really worry about what rights they are supposed to have or what they're not getting or what they're entitled to. As long as they're not thinking about that, if they're distracted by rising prices, they feel they have no occasion to protest, or they're distracted by some made up sentimental issue that relates to some imaginary golden age culture that they never experienced but clearly was there just a few generations ago. Continuously rewriting history, continuously changing laws, continuously providing both surveillance and distraction. So I think with more authoritarian countries, the way is to make sure that people do not figure out how to rise up against the government is a major part of the playbook of governance. And seeing that an option in my own country right now, where it really wasn't there to this extent even a decade ago, it makes me think that obviously one thing that everyone in our part of the world who's even mildly aware of just the history of the century that we've been through, right, is aware that situations where uncontrollable mass violence break out are the worst case scenario, right? So just given the history of India, the history of Bangladesh, I would not think that is a solution to anything, because the mass trauma that creates is, it lasts unanswered or unsolved for generations, right? So yeah, so I don't know what the solution to that is, really. I mean, because in all over South Asia, I think it's true that governance is top down rather than bottom up, right? I mean, parts of history where there are strong enough labor movements and strong enough collectives to influence in a major way decision making to policy that is citizen friendly, kind of erodes into the return of feudal systems under other names and other forms. So yeah, I think smarter people than I have tried to figure out non-fictional, non-science fictional solutions to this. I certainly do not have the answers. Do you think you have something in the bag for us, Saad?
Well, I mean, we were talking about smarter people trying to figure out answers, but then smarter people have vested interests, right?
Yeah.
And I think authors maybe don't have vested interests. Authors certainly have biases, right?
Yeah.
But we're too poorly rewarded. Nobody's paying us millions of dollars to push some kind of agenda, right? So I think it goes with a lot of the aspects of your book where you're thinking where in your world you can't trust any information flow, right? Simply because it's all bought and paid for by various kind of media polls and interests and whatever, and to a point where like one of the characters, Tara, who wants to be a star, right? She actually has no personality. She's like, give me the polls and tell me what the audience wants, and I'll just act like that. So it's a kind of feedback loop, right? And I think maybe a lot of theoretical academics, which is pushing, let's say democracy or this or that. And I'm not anti-democracy and I'm not communist, whatever. I don't really care. But it seems like a lot of that is a feedback loop of people being paid to say things.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And the any kind of framework where there is an ecosystem and the amplification of any idea is rewarding career-wise for anyone will result in a feedback loop like this.
I mean, to me personally, I find that even though I do, and you as well, because we're speaking English, we're writing English, we in a subcontinent, we automatically come from a degree of privilege, right? So it's
Oh,
a
yeah.
kind of same situation as maybe your book characters, where people of privilege who could just get along maybe have no business telling people whose backs are against the wall how to do things, right?
Absolutely.
There's a degree of, are you
So-
are you really
No, and this is
yeah.
no, and this is exactly why my point of view characters were people of privilege, because I felt it would be both wrong to be prescriptive in any way of, you know, this is how you should behave to defeat the system that is oppressing you in ways that I cannot even imagine. And it would be kind of exploitative, I think, because we've had enough kind of, you know, watch these people suffer in a vaguely circus-like way, literature
Yeah,
from our past.
poverty
Yeah.
porn. Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
of course, when we
Yeah.
have
So,
a lot of poverty to shove at people. Yeah, and I appreciate that you're not doing that, because also for me that comes off um, as inauthentic in many ways, right?
yeah, it's
Because
patronizing as well, isn't it?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
patronizing, and it's also, I don't know, it's just uncomfortably exploitative of people who will probably never have the chance to sit down and read books like this, right?
yeah,
So,
and dispute your portrayal, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, but um, no, I mean, I don't know. Ultimately, to me, it seems like everything of our current system is based on protecting private property of the privileged.
Yeah.
And you talk about walls, that there's like 7 cities and the guy's trying to get to, he literally is thinking like that. He's thinking like, how do I get to the first city where I have complete protection and I can literally wipe out the rest of the country if I need to, just to protect this. And I think that's by and large quite true. What you're saying. I mean, those systems are in place, and it's mainly to protect property, right? Wealth.
Yeah.
Which
yeah.
is what, which is why I think that the real answer is to destroy wealth when you're unhappy, as a population. I mean, you shouldn't go. I feel personally that you shouldn't go through writing editorials or letters to the manager or voting or peaceful protests. You should jump immediately from zero to setting fire to shit, because that gets you an immediate response, because then you're understanding that the whole system is just about, it's not really about oppressing you, it's about protecting assets of wealthy people. And if you flip it and somebody suddenly comes with pitchforks to your house, you would immediately, I mean, how would you react? I think you might very quickly, despite all beliefs, fall back on the systems that your ancestors have placed to protect you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, which is why, I mean, I would, and especially over the last few years, when we've seen more and more people, in the news all the time or on the edges of protests, that one has the sense of place enough to get out of the situation before it turns violent, which was increasingly a skill that everyone developed when they were when they were at that bridge between situations where peaceful protests were about to turn into people burning shit, right? So there is the sense of this, you're on the border of complete chaos, and the same systems that are protecting you are the same ones that are the problem. Right. And absolutely, if people with pitchforks show up at my house, I would entirely be jumping to find what evil systems could protect me in any way, in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it's a difficult problem to solve in that sense, because you understand that the system might protect you a little bit, so you still use it. but it's also oppressing you, of course.
Exactly. And and this ability to look away is something that when cultural warming occurs, let's say, is something that you find that as writers you find yourself thinking about all the time, right? um exactly where you stand, what you should do, um how privileged should you feel that you have the basics in place and a career that's going on. You're sitting at home writing, and your life is probably less different during the pandemic than pretty much everyone else, so yeah, so it is that assumption that you know trying to see the world through the eyes of characters who are in the same way kind of protected by the same systems that oppress other people, um, and whose ability to even engage in change in any way is at a very micro level. But it's something that they have to try to do to deal with the shame on the one hand, um, of not being able to do more, um, but constantly weighing the cost of every micro piece of action that they are taking, because there are things that they want defended. In Joey's case, she wants her parents to be safe, and she has the beginnings of a sense of how much danger they might be in. And as the whole world falls into this churn of the rise of authoritarianism everywhere, um, climate change led migration, which is going to affect politics in every part of the world, right? And it's going to fuel further right-wing politics, the struggle over resources as the earth changes. It's the research for this book was, I think, among the most depressing times of my life. uh, so which is why I'm almost 100% sure there will never be a sequel to this book, because I just don't want to do the research again and I made this long timeline of horrific things that were about to happen, and then they kept happening ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
So I would keep looking at the news and going, no spoilers, no spoilers, this was supposed to be released 2 years from now. And that's not fun. And it's not, I still maintain it's not dystopian if you're living in the middle of it, even if you're not affected by the worst of it, because it's also kind of the setting for your workplace comedies and your romances and your family dramas and all of that. So you're just dealing with 15 episodes of Black Mirror that are playing at the same time, and you're in them.
Yep. I mean, well, that's the thing, right? It's not evenly spread out, the dystopian parts, or the
Unevenly distributed.
It's not evenly distributed, right? Like I think Gibson said that the future isn't evenly. It's already here. Yeah, and of course that's true. I mean, parts of life are very nice, right? For maybe not for everybody, but for vast majority of, let's say, people, there's still good parts to life.
Absolutely.
It's not absolutely horrible. If it was absolutely horrible every second, then you would be becoming violent. I mean, there wouldn't be any other solution, right? But I guess personally, at what point would you hit the streets?
Hit the street as in start burning things?
Yes.
I don't know, sir. I mean, I have to say that my instinct so far has been, when things are beginning to get burnt in my proximity, to get out of there. So I don't know. I think it would probably be at a point where people who I personally love are in real danger, or I was. But again, this is the kind of speculation that is only depressing.
Have you ever like participated in riots?
No.
Have you walked through them?
Yes.
Past them.
I have walked and then run away from them. You're beginning to sound like a British visa form, where you say, "Are you a terrorist? Yes, no. Have you participated in genocide?" And I'm wondering what they'd even do if someone went, "Yes."
Research for purely research purposes. I'm just saying. I'll give you some cover. No, if if with the omnipotent power that we have as godlike authors to kind of change our stories, if we can find solutions that are plausible at least to readers, I mean, is that not a depressing thing?
I've never felt even mildly omnipotent as an author, except in the sense of just having fun, being able to make stuff up. But any sense of omnipotence I've felt as an author has been swiftly cured by the publishing process. So I think just as constitutional institutions and frameworks exist to keep theoretically to keep authoritarian powers in check, publishing exists to keep the imaginations of authors in check, which is that you have been playing God for many months. Now wait for 6 more. And so, yeah, I think I've been writing for too long to feel particularly powerful when I'm writing, because it seems more like building yourself a refuge where you earn yourself some time to play for a bit. I deeply love that, the freedom that it gives you when you earn it, but I think in the societies that we live in, it's very hard to feel power. um, you know I don't know, at least that's how it works for me.
I mean, we do, I think, live in kind of more authoritarian regions as a whole, right? Even our kind of democracy feels authoritarian in a way.
Yeah.
You think that's just because of large numbers? Is that
I think
it's possibly the
yeah, on the one hand, it's about large numbers of very diverse populations, and I think it's a lot of it is just the sheer amount of inequality and the shortness of time with which to execute policies, and it's also the continuation of feudal systems under modern names. The further you get from the corridors of power, the more feudal things get. Um, so many monarchies have survived both the colonial era and the independence era, and still survive because the people are now members of parliament. But a lot of the people under their pretty medieval rule have not even considered that there is an option to vote for someone else. They can't imagine a world where this family is not king,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and
absolutely.
then it doesn't matter what ideology is ruling the center of the country or what is put down on paper as anything like that. For that vast area of land and all the people who kind of survive in it, there has always been
It's a
the
kingdom. Yeah, it's still a
yeah,
kingdom
it's still a kingdom.
in all but name. Yeah, of course. Uh, yeah, so I mean, in a way, you at the same time you've got like kind of Stone Age type uh, cultures all the way to the extremely high tech, and it all exists at the same time in the same place almost, right? Um, your one other part that I really enjoyed was Lakshmi, who's the kind of helper, the staff,
Yeah.
housekeeper for Joy's parents, and of course we still have that here, widely.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
the idea of you having servants and staff and so on, cooks and cleaners and whatnot, and they're in your home, and then at the same time uh, they're living themselves in the city, in a kind of slum area or a very low rent type area. So already it's creating that kind of dual culture already, right? Just the
Yeah.
economies of it, right? that these are poorly paid people that still need to live in the city next to you. So you always get this weird thing where there's a rich gated community type area, and right outside there's a very poor area,
Absolutely.
and they're intimately connected.
Yeah, and so you have the whole kind of construct of your, 3-4 layered dystopian city, all within the radius of a half-hour drive at most. And clusters of this feeding into higher pyramids of power, making up a sort of, a termite hill compound that becomes a city in itself. So it's very, and it's hard to translate into words how close it all is geographically, how it's all cramped together into these micro dystopian movies, everything everywhere all at once. And I think, I have to say that I've really enjoyed the sense of this that I get from your books, where it's that same sense of this really oppressive real world environment and the kind of pressure of everything bearing down on the characters, whether or not, and they're seeking escape in video games. There's a lot of imagination fronted things going on, but there is the centrality of the constant anxiety and pressure that people are experiencing, even when times are good, even when they're enjoying themselves, which I don't know, which maybe is at least part of a common ground between subcontinental writers when they're writing, however disparate they are. I think we should go into questions where I don't know.
Just thinking the same thing.
Well, there you go.
Hi, Ali. That was
Hi. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah.
So we have a few questions here. This is from an anonymous attendee. It says, I find it so interesting that you only went 10 or so years into the future for this book. How did you go about making that future feel distinct from the present? Did you find it more or less difficult than writing in the far future or the past?
Right. So I'll try and keep this brief because this is ordinarily a really long answer. I'd initially thought about this book being something which happened in multiple segments, each a decade apart, tracing the next 50 years of this part of the world. Because I always start ambitious in theory. I ended up setting the whole thing only 10 years in the future because I was building it off news and speculative nonfiction. And I started realizing that, looking at either technological innovation or some kind of miraculous social connection as something that would save the world would feel a bit dishonest and a bit unreal for a world that was where I was trying to build it entirely off reality. So I then changed everything and decided to make the technology, the people, the settings, the overall environment as close to real present day as possible. So the locations are all places that I know well. The people are all shameless mixtures of people that I know quite well. The fields of work are slight future extensions of fields that I've actually worked in. And the technology is all stuff that's been invented already, at least in prototype. So the question really becomes of its mass distribution and its availability in this part of the world and how it's going to be used in this part of the world, both as convenience and fun and accidental data theft for the privileged classes and absolute exclusion and oppression for the unprivileged classes. So yeah, that's why 10 years. And that's why that's how distinct. And I found it both more and less difficult than writing the far future or the past, because I think you need a little room to be really expansive with, with bigger concepts. And this was much more about kind of tap dancing around a highly compressed environment, which I didn't enjoy, but which was also very interesting and challenging to do. That wasn't a short answer, was it? Yeah.
No, it's the perfect length of answer. So this is another anonymous attendee, and it says, how did you pick the different modes of resistance that you wanted the characters to explore?
By mostly looking around at what people were doing in the real world and figuring out how this might look 10 years from now, with additional technology added to it under the circumstances in which it was taking place. So you have your, and this is at a point where I'm imagining that current or conventional sources of anti-government protests and so on. And Saad and I were discussing this a little earlier, where the civilized methods aren't really working, and also because oppression moves faster than resistance at a large scale. The powers that be have figured out ways to push these into the margins. So these wars are now taking place out of the public eye, and sophisticated propaganda has found a way to make people in inner circles ignore it altogether. So with those pushed to the margins, I was trying to look at how one might go about building an in-city resistance in a very strongly surveilled situation. So I was looking at what people were doing in protests in the present day to evade and avoid surveillance. I was looking at a history of secret societies in the past and how they led to revolutions. And it was also convenient for me that my characters were not in the heart of this. So they were mostly experiencing the fringes of this, and both their desire to join resistances and their fear that these were elaborate traps were what I was dealing with more.
So interesting. So let's see. This question, this is a good one. You've talked elsewhere about The City Inside as an anti-dystopian novel. What does that mean?
So anti-dystopian, I don't know whether it's already a thriving subgenre. It might be. There seem to be so many, and I'm always struggling to catch up with all of them. I've not really seen it before, so I don't know if I've coined it. That's not, either way is not really an issue for me. I'm calling it anti-dystopian because I fundamentally think that dystopia is a function of distance. Because when you're looking, I think this might be true for Saad as well. When we engage with work that is kind of dystopian classic, we're not really feeling like this is something that couldn't happen to us. But if you're further away from it, there is a slight thrill in reading dystopian work where you feel that this is horrible, but actually that same thing is happening all around the world. Every terrible system described in a dystopian novel, a version of it exists in history, probably exists quite near everyone. It definitely exists somewhere in the world, ideally as far away from you as possible. But I think real life trains us to look away from terrible things in order to cope. But if you're living in the middle of an environment like this, then it can't be dystopian because you don't have that distance from it. Given how depressing my research was, I think that the actual future is likely, quite possible, it's going to be worse than anything that's in The City Inside, which at the time of writing I thought was a pragmatic but fundamentally positive office comedy turning into life-facing drama and a possible coming of age. So that it's almost universally been called dystopian after it's been released makes me ask questions about myself, really, more than anything else. Yeah, and also because anti-dystopian, third, and fortunately finally, because I think the idea that you're finding hope, you're moving towards being active, finding ways to cope both for yourself, protecting the people you love, building communities, building towards the future, even if you know the social change is a multi-generational complex process and you might not be the one who gets everyone there. I think that fundamental hope and sense of eventually overcoming terrible systems is not dystopian at all. I think it looks forward in a way that dystopia doesn't. Hence, anti-dystopian. Another not short answer. Sorry.
No, I loved it. So we are just about at the end of our time tonight. So I'm going to ask a last question, and it is, what is next for each of you? What should we keep an eye out for?
Saad, you should go.
Well, I'm taking a short break. Yeah, more dystopian stuff, I guess. That's I think we need to burn shit down, basically. That's the solution.
It's a quiet elegance with which Saad says this, which makes him truly dangerous. I want to do a big plug. I hope everyone watching this has already read Saad, and in case you haven't, you need to. this. It's so good. I mean, I had the privilege of reading the new one earlier before it came out, and it's just wonderful work.
Came out in March, I believe. Yeah, it's linked. Go check it out. Go follow those links.
Speaking of myself, what's next is I just finished writing another novel where all the restraint I had to display in the city inside I disposed of. So it contains my kind of fallback comfort zones of lots of action, adventure, romance, and really silly stuff. But for 2 books instead of 1. It's a big sci-fi fantasy adventure. I don't want to talk too much about publishers will be annoyed, but yeah, but I've just finished another book which I'm quite excited about.
Yeah, so exciting. Yay. All right, so we have hit 7 o'clock, so it's about time for us to call it a night. But I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you that joined us this evening. This has been such an incredible conversation. For everyone who would like to get your hands on copies of The City Inside, go ahead and follow that link. How about I just relink it, make this really easy. I'm gonna, voila, go ahead and follow those links to go track down these books. Of course, audience members, as always, let us know what you thought of this event, either in person or on any of our social media. We truly love hearing from you. Samit and Saad, thank you so much for being here. This has been so much fun. Do you have any last things you want to say before we wave good night or good day in your cases?
Yeah, I want to say a big thank you to you, Ali. I want to say a big thank you to Third Place Books. I want to say a huge thank you to Saad. It's so good to finally meet you, and I think it's so weird and so inevitably and funny that we're doing it digitally in Seattle when we kind of live close to each other. I cannot wait for your next book. Thank you, everyone who came. Yeah, that's all. It's been delightful doing this, and I hope to see you soon.
Well, it's been absolutely our pleasure. It's so much fun. I think this is the point of the night where we say one last huge thank you and do the awkward waving thing. So have a wonderful day or night, depending on where you are in the world. And that is that. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.